Without doubts, I think it's by far the best league in the world.
How dare you score like that in the Premier League? Mission accomplished in the Premier League.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to American Scouser, our Premier League show, and we are continuing our previews of upcoming season. It is still a relatively early preview, not as early as the ones we did last week, but we'll continue with the teams. Next up, guys, is Chelsea. So I want to start more with their, I think, outgoings when we come to Chelsea, because I feel like while they're adding a lot of pieces, what they've lost gets a bit overlooked. Gally, I want to start with you on this one. I mean, to me, the biggest two are obviously like they're losing two center backs at the same time, despite adding Koulibaly and stuff like that. I feel like it is a huge change when you're changing that much of your back line.
So I'd say Timucin, to me, the bigger loss is Rudiger. Christensen, though he was coming on at times, he's been in and out of the starting lineup. There were times last year that they played Azpilicueta in the back three. They played Reece James against certain teams that had pace on the left-hand side in the back three, even though he's probably their best fullback going forward. So Christensen not as big. I believe Rudiger was the best center back top to bottom in the Premier League last year, and I think that's what spurned his move. I think the Chelsea unrest really led to him leaving because they did that low ball offer for him at the beginning because Chelsea's old model was not giving players over 30 more than a 1-year contract. And I really think that came back to bite them with Rudiger because from all accounts, it sounded like he really wanted to stay and take on a bigger role on the squad. So for that, those two big center backs, losing them, I do think they're doing well in the market in replacing them. But, they still have the Sarr kid, the Chalobah kid. They have Thiago Silva, until Azpilicueta leaves. So they are still stocked. But there's got to be some questions when you lose a player like Rudiger, who basically was almost, as disgusting as this is, he was the heart and soul of kind of a heartless side.
I mean, that's the thing. I think Rudiger was the one who kind of carried that back line. I mean, we're obviously not hiding. I'm definitely not hiding with the back wall here. Liverpool fans. So it's kind of like what Van Dijk brings to Liverpool, I feel like. It's one person. I was going to say, you're not hiding it very well either, but Bickler's got the crown on, so he's hiding it really well. But I mean, I felt like, what we have similar to Van Dijk in terms of controlling that back line, leading that back line. It's one thing to have like a good center back, but, somebody who can actually control the back line is 10 times more important. So Bickler, when you look and you see Koulibaly coming in, and I know like there's more names that's being thrown out there. They're talking to a couple other center backs, and like Gally mentioned, they do still have Silva, even though he's aging more and more like I am. What do you make of it? I mean, do you think it's even trade? Because there was a lot of talk about, what a steal he is at basically 42 million. Do you think it's like an even exchange over there, or did they go trade up or trade down?
I don't think it's an even. Look, Koulibaly may come in and be incredible, right? But like the bottom line is I agree with both of your assessments of Rudiger, and I don't think it's a player you just replace. Like when you get to that level of play in general, you just don't replace a player like that. It's not possible. I mean, there are a few situations where you get extremely lucky and a player comes in and performs above the means and steps in, and maybe we see that happen. But like, I think this is a huge loss for Chelsea because you took the one position in that team where they had an identity. If you look at Chelsea's team, they had an identity in how they played defense, and they built around that. You knew that you were going to struggle to score against Chelsea, and they've always struggled. Like their struggles last year was around the fact that they just could never find an identity in the final third of the pitch. But like that back line was solid. You have those right and left wing backs that push up, and you have a solid back three. And Rudiger was the heart of that. And he was the linchpin, not only defensively, but on set pieces going forward in the air. Like he was just even offensively, he really contributed. I think that's a huge loss for them. I think they've done about as good as they could possibly do. Koulibaly is going to be, he looks like he's the real deal. We've talked about him for years. All the big clubs have been linked with him. He's not a long-term solution at 31. So, you got 3-4 years maybe, and he's paired with Thiago. So you've got an aged center back pairing. Now, Chelsea's got a ton of kids. If they get Jules Koundé, that would be a huge coup for them, I think, around 55 million.
Done.
Yeah, he's going to be, I really believe in that kid. I think that he would be their future. And I think that he's got some versatility to his game, and he's got the pace for the Prem. My one concern about him is whether he can hold up physically, which is the opposite of Koulibaly, who I think can hold up physically, but I'm not sure has the pace to play in that back three yet. So that's the major question mark around him. Chelsea's an interesting side. They've got an owner who's going to spend. Look at what he's done with the Dodgers. They spent another $100 million. My thing is, they've got a lot of pieces they got to sort out. They had those windows where they spent coming off their transfer ban. They spent like $150 million in one window just in the midfield, and then Mason Mount ends up being their best midfielder. So it's like you got to they've got to nail down. I think Sterling helps them sort of rebrand and get some identity up front. I think that's a tremendous buy for them. But they've got to sort out. They've got a lot of pieces. You look at Ziyech, Werner. There's question marks around whether both those players will be there or not. So there's a lot of question marks, and very similar to Arsenal, where the young core seems to be their most consistent performers, which is not ideal when you're spending what they've spent.
And that's like the odd thing, because they have spent a lot of money, and it's almost like it's a club that's, even though more successfully done than United, for example, just spends the money, gets a bunch of, solid pieces where you can see them, performing well on a team. And then they're hoping like it sticks and this one works out. But then afterwards, kind of like what Bickler is saying, it ends up being your young kid actually is the one that like shines out of that group and stuff. So I want to ask you about the center backs first, Gally, but right after that, I want you to kind of talk about Lukaku too, because we're talking about, like signing people and then spending a lot of money. And let's face it, like beginning of last season, he was probably not everybody's, but a lot of, pundits pick for, being the top scorer, the golden boot and all that kind of stuff. And then it just ended up being a Pogba-like disaster in a Chelsea outfit over here. But I want to ask you, Gally, first about the center backs. Even if they do get Koundé, I thought, I know like there was talks about Barcelona trying to snatch it, but seems like Barcelona is trying to snatch everything. They're just out there trying to be a spoiler at this point, it feels like. But if they do get Koundé, how do you see their back line? And then give us your take on the whole Lukaku ordeal.
Yeah. So initially, I think the Koundé deal is done. I think it was late last night they reported that he was actually traveling to England to possibly undergo a medical. He's agreed on $9 million net a year, which will make him, I think, the third or fourth highest paid center back in the Prem, and one of the youngest. So that to me is a done deal. And to Paul's point, I think that's the future of their back line. I was pleasantly surprised with Thiago Silva last year. I think even though he shows that his age, his positioning, and his just knowledge of the game still amazes me when he's in the right spots. And I think in a back three, that gets protected. And I think that will also help Koulibaly's pace issues. And that's kind of saying it nicely. Anyone who remembers us playing against Napoli in the Champions League and Mo running over him, or even more, the embarrassment that was when Sterling basically just tormented him for 90 minutes 2 years prior when he was playing for Napoli then. So I always question whether or not he'd be able to keep up with the pace. So that's going to be really interesting. As far as Lukaku goes, I'm not that surprised it failed. If you go back to your old employer 3 times and think that it's ever going to be different when it never worked out when you worked there prior, you're kind of a moron. And that's what I feel like he did. He's the guy who, was great at Anderlecht, found his way to Chelsea way too young, and then went to West Brom, got success, thought he was going to come back and be a star at Chelsea, ended up playing for a shit club like Everton. I'm sorry, just a club like Everton. And then, he ends up at United, semi-success, goes to Inter, really finds his feet. I always thought Juventus was a perfect fit for him, even way back before he went to Inter, because the Italian game seemed to play perfect into his style and his traits. And he did that. And then he came back to Chelsea and was an absolute flop. So I do think that they will have they will get better by letting him go. But this just over exemplifies the Roman Abramovich era as a whole, or error, because they were allowed to make mistakes like paying $300 million for Lukaku and then having to loan him out. I mean, that's how much they spent net over 3 buys, over $300 million on one player. And that's crazy to me. And they didn't sell him for large amounts. So I think they'll get better from that move. I, like Paul, really like the Sterling acquisition. I think he's going to be invigorated. I think he's going to be their best player. And I think he is now their leader because he's really the only winner left in the side.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing with Lukaku. I mean, it was almost like, I don't know if it's a big loss because, I mean, where was he the entire time for the most part, the second half of the season anyway? It would almost be like, you know, he would be trotted out there to say, like, prove me wrong, kids. And it was just like, well, you did it again. Come back into the side over here. And so I don't think it's a big loss. I'm glad we were kind of like, let's go back to Sterling. I feel like he suits them the way they play a lot better. But at the same time, going back to what you were initially saying, Bickler, doesn't it kind of almost is like writing on the wall that they are going to move some of their players? Because you can only have, I mean, not everybody is united where you load up with wingers and then be like, hey, what are we going to do now? Because it feels like they have the same issue where they just keep loading wing players and can't really decide which horse they want to go with.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that's going to come down to them identifying who their striker is, right? Like what do they want? Like I said, this is like a final third identity and they haven't been able to figure it out, right? Because like, I think at times they played best with Havertz in this false 9, right? When they pushed him in as a false 9, I think that, unlike, you know, honestly, that's going to make a lot of sense if you've got Sterling, because you want Sterling to be able to run in behind. And so, but I mean, that's gonna, like, then do you put Werner in that left wing where he's played before? I mean, if you're gonna have him in the side, I mean, that's where it makes the most amount of sense. But then you got Hudson-Odoi in there that needs time. Gallagher is gonna stay, which will be interesting. It'll be very, very interesting to see how they play. I don't know. It's like I said, it's gonna come down to what they want to do at that striker position in terms of what works for them. But they've got a lot of pieces. They got to figure out that they spent a lot of money on in the midfield. I mean, that really goes back all the way down to Chilwell, who they spent like a record-breaking fee on, who's come in and been hurt most of the time. So like they've got a lot of. I think that's where they're actually in a good spot. Is they've got a lot of pieces that they can dismantle and sell off, right? So like, it's interesting because I see them in this window. They spent £100 million and not really recouped anything yet. But they've got a lot of pieces that they can shift around and recoup that money and sort of reinvest into the squad.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think they got to figure out, and that was the issue. I think Lukaku did not fit what they wanted to do. And I thought Timo would. So that's like an interesting name. I want to get your take on Gally because obviously he was rumored a lot in terms of coming to Liverpool. And so we, you know, researched him a lot back then. And, you know, we watched him a lot in the past. And I was actually one of those people who was kind of like looking forward to Liverpool getting it. And I still believe if he did come to Liverpool, we would make a lot better use of his pace and his skills as opposed to what it's almost like Chelsea took him and then just tried to put him in a different role that he could not adjust to, plus adjusting to the league at the same time. So it kind of like screwed him up. And once their confidence goes as a striker, it goes downhill really fast.
Yeah, especially a striker who isn't known for his world-class finishing. He's known for creating 10 opportunities and making 2. So once your confidence goes, those 2 become a lot harder to make, as we've seen, because he's had some of the great misses of all time. And he's only been there for 2 campaigns. To be fair to him, he was purchased during the time when Frank was there, and then Tuchel came in, and Tuchel clearly does not rate the style of play that he has for his setup, because he only gets to play in primarily, you know, when they're on the counter. I've seen a little bit of Chelsea's preseason. They've been playing a lot of 4-3-3. It looks like they really feel like their best attack is going to be Sterling, Havertz, and Mount as a front 3. And I think that's more about getting Mount out of the midfield to possibly open up room for more minutes for Gallagher and Ruben Loftus-Cheek, who Tuchel clearly loves because he gave him a lot of minutes as he got healthy last year in the second half of the campaign. I'm with Paul, though. I think Pulisic, Ziyech, I think N'Golo Kante could move if the right offer came in for him with only 1 year left. Jorginho, and I think they would open the door, pack the bags, and fly Werner to wherever was willing to give them a fee. Because I think they paid so much for him, and they've seen some of the flashes, and he's one of those players I just think he has to be playing because he needs lots of opportunities. He's not a last 10 minutes come on and win you a match. You know, and I feel like that's why he won't fit there. The one guy I would say, we've seen him on the screen a couple times, Gallagher is staying. You know, they rejected a $35 million bid for Broha, the kid who was on loan at Southampton, and supposedly Tuchel absolutely loves him and has told him there is real opportunity for him to fight for the job. I think Havertz starts the season as the striker with Broha as his deputy. But I think there's a chance that Broha, some point during the year, starts starting in the middle for Chelsea if they don't buy a striker by the end of the window.
Yeah, they do have. I think it's a team that's going into the season, at least, you know, to an outsider, and I think their own fans, with a lot of question marks because there's so many players out there. I mean, you just threw out another, like, a really solid player name in like Gallagher. I mean, there's so many names out there. But you feel like a lot have to eventually go, for one, to get some of the money back, and for two, I don't think a lot of these players are going to be happy with that role of being like a rotation guy and stuff like that. Who do you expect to move out, Bickler, if you were a betting man, which you are? I don't know if you're going to bet on this one, but who would you bet on moving on from Chelsea once the season starts, will no longer be a Chelsea player?
I think Ziyech is the one that's like probably the first. That's my first. I would not be surprised to see Azpilicueta go. I could see that happening. Werner, if the fee's right, I think would go. So those are probably my three most probable, but I think Ziyech is the one that's sort of nailed on. Like, I feel like he's got to move. I think that's got to be a priority move for them because I still think they can get most of what they paid back for him. And I think there's got to be a priority in freeing up room in the midfield for the young guns.
That's what I was going to ask you, because Gally brought up an interesting point with Conte, especially with 1 year left on the contract. Would you think they would want to cash on a player like that? Because, I mean, he would hold a lot of value to a lot of teams, really. I mean, the dude is still, I know he's not as reliable health-wise as he was earlier in his career, but, I mean, I love him as a player.
They could. I mean, it just depends. Like, it really depends on what formation they end up settling into, right? Like, if they continue play with a back three and a 4 in front of it, they're probably going to need them. But like, you know, Gally said, it looks like they're shifting to a 4-3-3. And in that case, that, you know, that sort of lessens the necessity for him when you've got Jorginho. You've got Kovacic still, who can play a holding role. So you've got a lot of pieces that probably need time that are younger that you've invested in. So yeah, I think that lessens. I love Conte. He's nowhere near where he was 3 or 4 years ago, obviously, but I think it makes a lot of sense from a personnel standpoint. And really, like, I think a lot of what Chelsea does and a lot of their success this year hinges on Tuchel's ability to manage that locker room with those personalities, rotate that squad in a way that's efficient, that keeps them fresh and everyone happy. And that's a lot harder than, you know, we could talk about that, but that's pretty hard in practice when you've got they've got this really dramatic mix of established veteran stars and young promising kids that need time. And the collision of those two worlds, when you have such a dramatic sort of contrast in those two with not a lot of pieces in the middle, that gets really difficult.
So, Gally, what we said, a lot of questions. It's that time to give some answers.
Yep.
I mean, last year it started hot for them, and it was, you know, everybody was like, oh, it's a 3-man race. And then, yeah, after the second corner, they kind of like started falling off. How do you see them? Where do you see them ending up this year? Do they compete for the title?
No. Amazing that a club that won the Champions League 2 years ago in really impressive fashion, to be fair, have so many questions going into a Premier League campaign with the investments they've made since. I'm going to say they're the same team as last year. They finished this campaign somewhere between 4th and 6th, and that's going to depend on how the players gel and how that back line goes. But if I were making a prediction, it would be this. If it doesn't go well to start, Tuchel's not there by 2023, because this guy isn't a guy who plays well with management, never has. Got fired at Dortmund, got fired at PSG, was a serial winner at both. Came here and only got an 18-month contract because they knew the asshole they were hiring. And that's his personality that makes him great. And I think he's the type of guy, he walks if he doesn't like the way it's going. And I think Todd Bowley, the Dodgers owner who now owns them, is the type of guy who wants to be known for their success. And I think Tuchel's the type of guy who wants to run the show his way. So I'm going to say 4 to 6, but if it starts going the other way, they could have some big problems and it could be a tough year for Chelsea.
Yeah, he's a lot like Conte in that way, you know, the way I view him. Like he's like my way or the highway. And I think he has, when you have his resume, I guess it's, you know, a lot easier to be able to do that and say, if you guys don't like it, oh, well, kind of thing, because you know you're going to get a lot of other great offers. Because I really think he's a great manager. I mean, you got to bear in mind, I know they kind of like fell off last year, but there was a lot of drama to control aside from, you know, like the football on the field. So where do you have him finishing, Bickler?
Very similar. I have them 4th. I could see them finishing 5th. I think there's just too much up in the air, and there's not enough cohesion and stability right now to push them up higher. I think they've got too much quality to finish 6th when I look at this table. But I mean, yeah, I think 4th or 5th. I think they'll figure it out in 4th. I would also not be surprised if Tuchel walks, or I could also see Tuchel getting the rug pulled. Like, so Bully as an owner, he doesn't put up with a lot of shit. And I think that, like, if he needs to make a statement, he's somebody who likes a statement. And I think that he could surprise everyone. And if things aren't going well and there's conflict in the boardroom upstairs with the suits, I could see it happening, man. I really could. And I think, like, you know, a lot of us were like, oh, like Abramovich is gone. Like the Chelsea spending spree is over. But like from an owner standpoint, he's a good owner in the fact that he's going to spend money for Chelsea and he's going to do whatever it takes to make them a winner. I expect there'll be a learning curve for him, as there is for most American owners coming into the sport. But he's a smart enough dude that he will put the right pieces around him, very much like what happened at Liverpool. And I think if you're a Chelsea fan, you've got every right to be excited about new ownership, because I think he's going to do it, and he's going to do it the right way without blood money. And I think, I think they'll finish 4th, but I think, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of cleanup they have to do. I think it will happen. I think they finish 4th, but also if Tuchel walks and that's going to put an adjustment period further back. And so they could drop a spot or two. 6 seems too low for them, but you never know.
I'm a bit more bullish on him, actually. I am finish him 3rd, perhaps 4th if the start is not that good. I still think they have, and I think that's mainly due to Tuchel. I mean, and if it goes south early and like you guys predict, the ownership kind of like takes action, then I can see him dropping. But I think if they can kind of like control things as they kind of like work out all these new pieces in and not make it too rough of a start to the season, I see them finishing 3rd. So we shall see how that ends up. This was our early prediction for Chelsea. So next up is Crystal Palace. The fan-kicking Patrick Vieira is in effect. So let's start with you on this one, Bickler. Not a lot of changes for them in the off season as of now. I know there are some like rumors, especially, I mean, it wouldn't be a transfer season if Zaha was not rumored with like multiple moves. So what do you make of him overall? Is it a good thing for, especially like a coach like Vieira, who was starting to build something and you saw him slightly like, you know, having more of an identity? Is a lack of movement in some ways a good thing?
I mean, I guess I would first want to start out with saying that, like, my first reaction to this is that I want to make Patrick Vieira's profile pick my LinkedIn profile pick. If we could make that change, I think that would probably do a lot of good things for my social networking skills on the business side. But yeah, look at how happy he is. With good reason. I mean, I think they had a really good year. I think that he solidified a lot of them things for them. And I think he really created, I mean, I guess identity is my buzzword for the day, but I feel like they really sort of found themselves last year when they got away from just dreadful Hodgson, like static, ancient football. They started being a little more free-flowing from an offensive standpoint. I thought they, started to sort of solidify defensively, which was their main weakness. They've got a few things that are weird, so say they lose Zaha, because that's the rumor. Roma's in for Zaha. I know there's some teams that are circling that wagon. If I'm Crystal Palace, I'm like just lovingly shoving him out the door, because I think in a weird way with that team, as many young players as there are, I think that's almost addition by subtraction. Zaha is a dynamic player. He obviously is electric, but I think that I would be worried about his influence on my younger players. He has a tendency to be extremely temperamental, both all on and off the pitch. And I think that when they're on the pitch, Zaha wants the play to flow through him. And I don't think that's always what's best for Crystal Palace. And I think that they're sometimes improved when they don't flow through him. So if they lose him, though, if Zaha goes, they lose their two best players from last year, and him and Gallagher. So they kind of got to rebuild from there. Interesting in the fact that they really have like 5 players that they can plug in at striker. If you talk about the young French kid, Elise, you've got Eduardo, Benteke, Mateta, Ayew. There's got to be some, they seem to really sort of fluctuate how they use those guys. I would argue that I think Mateta is the most talented of the bunch. He's inconsistent, but he's like a big physical French striker, and I think he looks really good when he's on, when he's in form. So I think also they're probably their most prolific and best was Eduard. So I don't know how they're gonna set up in that regard. It'll be interesting to see how they set up top, especially if they lose Zaha. So some question marks, but they had a solid year last year. I think they've got a lot to build on, and I think Vieira has at least got them with a brand now.
So Zaha is an interesting one. So I want to kind of mainly ask you, and I would love to actually hear from Crystal Palace, hopefully in the comments about this one, because it is kind of like a dilemma. The dude has done so much for the club, and I agree. It's kind of like that deal where if he's not there, they might actually be playing better, and because the flow would be better and you wouldn't have one focus, so you can play more as a team when you're attacking. But at the same time, you go through the seasons and you go even sometimes, even this year, like game by game, he has, on paper at least, when you're looking at the score sheet, earned them so many points. By losing Zaha at the same time, do you really risk losing those points is what I would worry as a Palace fan. It's kind of like a win-win or a lose-lose to me, it feels like.
Yeah, I'll take this one and answer that question in kind of a reverse direction with a little bit of what Paul said. So they had a great year last year, right? They finished 12th. They added 9 players last year. So Vieira had a lot to basically break down the Hodgson, because basically at the end of the Hodgson era, they allowed every player to get to a free and walk. And then they just started buying young players and piecing them together. So I think that was a big win for them. They also had 15 draws. And on our first show, we criticized Brighton for all their draws, right? Well, if it weren't for all those draws, Palace would have legitimately been in a relegation battle. And if you take out Zaha's goals and assists, which was the highest percentage of any one player representing for a club, they would have been relegated in 18th position. Now, we all know someone else would have added, and if they were playing in his stead, would have created some of that. So, though I agree that I think it would be better for the club, I think it will set them back this personal season because they don't have a striker who can make up for his goal involvement. The one thing I agree with Paul a lot on is I think Mateta is the best striker they have, because I believe Elise is the best winger they have, and that includes Zaha. I think Michael Elise is 1 year away from being a top 6 player. I think if he was healthy all last year, there'd be bigger clubs in for him right now. When he played, I think he was their best player. And I always pronounce the kid's name wrong, but the other big signing they had last year, Abiche Eze, he's another player who creates in the midfield. I think he offers a lot to them going forward. But my number one thing for them is they need a striker. They need a striker that can jot down the start of the campaign, can score them 10 to 15 league goals. Because if you had 10 to 15 league goals from one player, I think you could really kick on for them. But without that, I think they're in a little trouble. I mean, they've made very little business, ins or outs, that improve their side. And I just don't see how that helps you kick on. And they better do something for Vieira, because I think eventually there will be bigger and better clubs coming in for their manager, just like bigger and better clubs come in for their players.
And you know me, Bickler, I love playing devil's advocate. So when we say, we're looking at these names and there's a lot of promising young talent there. There are some players that impressed. But could that also be because of the attention Zaha gets? So the moment he is gone, is that going to negatively affect how these guys look? Because let's face it, whenever you play Crystal Palace, one eye is always on Zaha and where he's going to be, what he's going to do. There's always one guy covering, one guy as a backup. So automatically creates some space for the other players.
I mean, I think you can make that argument both ways. I think you can always make that argument both ways. Like, is it the chicken and the egg, or does it make him less predictable, right, with him out? So I don't think we can answer that until we see it. But, I mean, I look at this and I see a pretty young, talented squad in general, all from top to bottom. And I think, honestly, we didn't talk about this Ducouré kid they picked up from the French league, this 22-year-old. I think he's going to be a stud. I really like what I've seen from him. And if I'm having anybody pick a young French strong central defensive midfielder out of the French league, I probably want it to be Patrick Vieira. He's probably got it. So I think, they've got the pieces. It's going to all hinge on what happens with Zaha. It really is going to. I mean, Galley's right. Maybe they take a step back to take 2 steps forward with that. And maybe that's what that looks like this year. But if I'm a Palace fan, I'm actually really, really excited for the first time in a long time.
So there's a couple of rumors of Dwight McNeil coming in, perhaps. And you guys might know Chris Richards, the American center back from Bayern.
That's done.
Is it a done deal now? Is it official?
20 million from Bayern Munich. He will be their starting center back. And Vieira had him at NYCFC on loan when he was in the MLS. So he knows the player. So he went and bought a guy he wanted. So I like that signing, both from an American standpoint and a Crystal Palace standpoint. He's really good. And if our men's national team ever gets better, it's because players get to leagues like the EPL, though, and get to show that they can be a center back. If he can be a starting center back in the Premier League, then he can be on the national team. Unlike a guy we're going to talk about in a little bit, who's been a starting center back in the Premier League and proven he's not a starting center back in the Premier League. But I'll wait to get to Tim Ream. But I'll say this.
He'll be a stud in the EPL. We'll start him at right back or something.
Don't get me wrong. I should have put a caveat, Paul. He'll be good as soon as we have a manager that is good enough to manage a national team and not.
All right, that's what I'm talking about.
So I love Galley's hate of the U.S. national team management.
I like how there's no worries. I'm not insulting anyone in England on this EPL show as long as I just rip on the U.S. men's national team. But
it's the one thing that really brings me and Galley together.
I think so. Yeah. It does unite you guys in the hate channel, so that's always great.
It should be our third political party in the United States.
That'd be a good idea. I have 3 big keys I'm hoping for them for this year, though. They need to establish a striker, right? They need more out of Elise and Abize. They should be their 2 focal points and get away from Zaha being everything to them. And most importantly, and this is selfish, I really think they need to buy a power-driven midfielder with something to prove with 2 last names.
Somebody needs an opportunity. Get that man an opportunity.
There is an opportunity somewhere at Selhurst Park for a good-looking
Comes
jersey.
with a free TikTok account.
Imagine the physical presence that beauty of a man would look like in that red, white, and blue classic kit. It would be just gorgeous. Ox, if you're listening, and we know you are, make a move to Crystal Palace.
Yeah, and take your wages with you. I don't know if Crystal Palace is gonna pick up those wages, but so what are they gonna pick up? How many points will they pick up, or more importantly, where will they end up? Bickler, let's start with you.
I have them like in that 8 to 12 range. That's where I have them. I have them in that sort of 8 to 12 range, but Gally is probably talking more sense. If Zaha leaves, they may take a little bit of a step back, but I don't know, man. I see them top half of the table. I'm bullish on Crystal Palace.
I think more than Zaha, to me at least, the loss of Gallagher is like the biggest one. I think that's gonna hurt him a lot more than anything else, unless they do another move to replace him somehow. I think that's gonna hurt. He was a part of a lot of the good stuff they did. He was the key part of, like, got him so many points with his runs into the box, his energy overall. Whenever you played him and you felt his presence on the field, I have him more going probably to the lower end of that one, like 12 to 14 range personally. Gally, what do you have?
I got him 11 to 14, and I think that's even being a little kind at times, because if they don't sign a striker, I don't see where they get the goals. I gave him 11 to 14 with Zaha controlling the pitch and still being the guy that drags them for some points. I think if he's gone, there might be 12 to 16, somewhere in that range.
You heard it there, folks. The can opening. Bickler is opening a can of whoop-ass on the Premier
You know what that
League.
means? We're getting ready to talk about Divock Origi.
Well, that's what we have for Crystal Palace. I think, honestly, if it wasn't for Vieira, our predictions would have probably been worse, really. I think he's done well last year, and let's see if he can kind of continue to build on that, and we shall find out. Next up, we have our favorites. So we have to probably put the disclaimer. I mean, we do in the beginning of the show, but we are Liverpool fans. So let's put that disclaimer out there before the Everton hate starts, and then do our predictions for Everton. Quite the off season for them. I think it's going to cause a lot of debate, I think. So let's start with you, Gally, on this one. And let's start with their departures. Key one probably being one of my least favorites in Richarlison. What do you make of that move? What do you make of the fact that Everton, I don't know if it's the right word to say let him go, but I guess brought it to the point where they lost him? Because it seemed like he was at least their heart and soul going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think Everton was always going to struggle to hold on to a player long term. When they signed him from Watford, it was considered a pretty good coup for them. He had a good year at Watford. I mean, Watford basically stole him from Flamengo for a song. If you look at Richarlison and you remove his crazy eyes and the fact that I have, as said before, believe that he's, a terrible human being both on and off the pitch, which seems to be proven kind of rightfully true at times. His production in the Premier League for both Watford and Everton has been really, really good. He's proven that he can play wide. He's proven he can play inside as a striker. He's even proven he can play off a striker at times with Dominic Calvert-Lewin. So outside of the crazy eyes and really, looking like he's ready to hurt a player at any moment, I think that they lose a lot by letting him leave. And I think they lose a little bit of their identity. And I'm not sure that team would have stayed up last year if Richarlison wasn't kind of leading the line, to a lesser extent, him and Gordon. So I think it's an enormous loss when you're going to rely on, the 850-pound Solomon Rondon and Dominic Calvert-Lewin to care more about football than fashion. And I just don't know that those two are going to be able to score enough goals that get them in a different position of the table come April, May of next year than they were this year. So I think their outgoings is a lot of dead weight, as we see on the screen. But they, as we'll get to when we talk about their incomings, it's not like they've replaced them with any additional talent. And when you buy bad for 3 straight years, it sometimes comes back to bite you, and it feels like that's happening to Everton right now.
How dare you call Cenk Tosun dead weight going back to Turkey for the 5th time, I think. He's 31 now, so he'll probably stay there. Actually, this is news to me. I didn't know he had German in him. This just shows that you can have one decent tournaments, come to the Premier League and just keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And he's back at Besiktas again. And yeah, I agree. The rest of it. And the problem is, Everton has spent so much money buying this dead weight. I mean, you're looking at it now and you're like, like you said, that's my natural reaction too. I mean, all these names that are gone, you're like, oh, it's like dead weights. But they paid some decent money to get this dead weight in the first place. Let me ask you the Richarlison question as well there, Bickler, because, I mean, he is one of my top hated guys, and it's not because he plays for Everton. It's just him. I'm the last guy to make fun of people's appearances because, the biggest joke is on me. But he always reminds me like one of those guys in like The Fifth Element. I don't know why. And his like just antics on the field, but I just don't know. I would love to hear from Everton fans. I know they really like in terms of like what he brings, but to me, it comes across as one of those players that you love him if he's on your team, but everybody else hates him.
For sure.
Right, Bickler? What do you think?
If I'm an Everton fan, I fucking love it. I love him. Yep. Like, he's a total wind-up. And, like, I mean, this is not a very good, like, comparison, right? But, like, I mean, when I was a player, I used to love that. I used to love to get under people's skin. I mean, I used to love to,
really? I would never have guessed.
I know that's shocking, right? But, like, I honestly think you need that. Like, I think you need a little bit of that on a side. Like, I think you need a little bit of steel in a way that's a little bit mischievous. And I think like his mischief sometimes crosses a line, but like, I think in the heat of competition, I'm okay with that, man. Like, I think, I mean, is he that far off from what Luis Suarez did? And as Liverpool fans, we like idolize Luis Suarez. Like, I know there's a deep divide between some of the things he did with Evra or what he did with, obviously the biting incidents, but like, I don't think Richarlison has hit those heights, but like, I think he does a lot of that same stuff. And I think internally there's just this insane desire to do whatever you need to do to win. And like, I will never fault a player for that. Never. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a big loss for them. I look at what they got for him. I'm surprised they didn't get more, but then I look at the fees for Sterling and all around the rest of the world football right now, and the fees are lower. Like, I mean, we talk about what Liverpool played for Darwin, right? And I think, you look at what his wages are over 5 years, and that makes a little bit more sense in the fact that a lot of that are rising costs with bonus incentives that need to be hit. But I think across the world, we're seeing fees lower because of COVID stuff and the financial state of most of these teams. So I think that's just another blow to Everton where they could have probably recouped more had we not gone through these COVID years. If I'm Everton and I'm looking for a silver lining, I'm looking for the fact that we have Calvin Lewin, who we know can produce, paired with Damari Gray and Anthony Gordon. And that's my silver lining for them. You got Tarkowski, which I think is a really good free pickup because, I mean, look, if you're going to get barraged on the back line, at least somebody who's got experience with that. Tarkowski grew up in a bomb shelter and then went to Burnley, which is essentially an extenuation of a bomb shelter. And so you've got a center back who's experienced with just getting bombed on. He was statistically in the top 3 of every major category as a center back. So I think it's a good free signing for him. Like, besides the fact that he's scoring on them in preseason, I mean, I think he's going to be fine. So, I mean, it's interesting to see what's going to happen the rest of this window because right now they look like a team who's treating this window as if you got relegated into the championship. And can they do that? Can they bleed off their big players and not reinvest in the squad and survive this year? I don't know that they can. But I also don't know if they're in a financial position where they can strengthen to the point they need to strengthen. And that's the really scary part if you're an Everton fan.
And I think that's the issue, the financial side of it. And, again, not because he's at Everton, but I can't stand Fat Frank. And again, me calling somebody fat is probably not that appropriate either, but I'm on a roll in this segment, so let's keep rolling. But yeah, I mean, I just don't think he is the kind of coach that's gonna, we were talking before this about Crystal Palace, and we are talking about like Vieira. I have more confidence in a manager like that in terms of getting more out of the young talents as opposed to somebody like Frank. Where do you sit on that, Gally?
Yeah, so I believe they stayed up despite Frank Lampard. I honestly believe hiring Frank Lampard was the biggest mistake they made all of last campaign. It didn't make sense at the time, and I feel like he did a few good things. Obviously, he got a couple big results down the stretch, but I really feel like the players did that, and Richarlison was a huge part of that. That didn't feel like it was a tactical change to anything. He'd go from a 3, he'd switch to a 4, he'd go back to a 3 mid-match. It was like he was lost. It was like he had no identity, which shouldn't shock anyone because he had no identity at Chelsea, and he had no real identity prior to that, even when he was at Derby. So, he struggled with that, and I think that is a big, big key for him. Where I look at, sorry.
No, go ahead.
What I'm also thinking about on this is that I think that if you asked me, I'd make him the betting favorite to be the first manager fired this season. They have a brutal start to the campaign. They have literally, Men in Blazers made the great tweet this week that Everton is going to successfully become the first team ever to be relegated from the MLS. They came on an American tour and lost all 3 matches to MLS teams, including being down 3-0 in 28 minutes to Minnesota. Minnesota was playing reserves. They started their first 11. It was like a collection of errors. And the crazy part was, in the second half, Minnesota went to some of their starters and actually took the pedal off because I think they were afraid the young Everton kids might start coming through with leg-breaking tackles because they were down 4-0 in Minnesota. And it's not getting any better. So for me, I would predict, I don't know if we're there yet, but if Fat Frank sticks around, I think he's out before the World Cup. If Fat Frank is there past the World Cup, I think Everton is deep in a relegation battle again, 15th to 18th. But I'll put this caveat to Paul's point. If Damari Gray improves on his start last year, which I think he will without Richarlison there, he'll be more offensive-minded. He'll play off the striker. I think Gordon kicks on and they can hold on to him. There's talk Newcastle might offer $40 million. If they do that, I don't know how Everton doesn't snap and take the money because he could have been a one-year wonder. And lastly, if Frank goes, this job might have Pochettino written all over it. And if you put a guy who knows how to coach young players, if you give him Damari Gray, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and you give him Anthony Gordon, you give him the young center backs, that Mikolenko kid that they got at left back was a really good buy in January. Like, they have some pieces there. And then if you get some other youth kids and you get a guy like Pochettino, maybe he revitalizes Dele Alli. Like, that's the type of job he's going to get. Pochettino's coming to the Premier League this year. He's either getting hired by Leicester or Everton or somebody, and he'll make them better. And I would be fearful if he went there because I think what he did at Southampton and even at times in Tottenham was with just as little talent to start, and he builds them into players. And this could be a landing spot for him, and I wouldn't like it because it makes them more competitive because he's clearly a good manager, whether he has great talent or not. Maybe a better manager when he has bad talent.
And I think that's why Lampard was a mistake, like you were saying too. They needed, knowing their financial situation and knowing what they're going to need moving, further after this, like after last season. I know they were in the relegation battle, but it's not like you brought on a coach that is used to relegation battles and can get you out of them or anything like that. He'd never seen it in his life. So it was more of a panic mode. I think it's a lot of drive and especially like the home games and stuff. And going back to Tarkowski, that's what I want to kind of ask you there, Bickler, because you mentioned, I agree that in terms of playing in a team like Burnley, who just kind of like constantly sits back and crowds and just like heads out to everything that comes in, I just don't know if he's going to perform as well in an Everton team where the crowd is not going to be happy if they're just sitting at home. The crowd kind of pushes them forward. The crowd wants them playing in a more of like an attacking game. And I just don't see him adjusting to that as well. So I want to get your take on that. And the second one, I kind of like asked this when we were talking about Crystal Palace and when we were talking about Zaha. The loss of Richarlison, Gally was talking about like Gray, because he did start the season like ridiculously good, and it was like, holy cow, this is going to be some move for them, and it kind of like fizzled out. Does it make it more difficult on a player like Gordon if he stays, and Gray? Because really, you took that one player that was a thorn in everybody's side when they played against them. Now you can kind of pay more attention to somebody like Gray or Gordon.
I don't think so. I mean, to me, you're going to get Damari out wide, which is where you probably want him, versus tucking him in almost as an attacking mid behind those players. So I think that you're going to see him in a position that suits his game naturally a little better. So, I mean, you can. This is like that same argument we made with Zaha, right? Like, does it make a player like him better with that primary talent out of front of him? And I don't know. I mean, I think there's going to be a little bit of both. I think for me, I think it will make him better because he'll be out wide where he can use his pace in space. In terms of Tarkowski, he's an interesting one because I always thought that Tarkowski had some pretty good offensive attributes. Like, I felt like he was pretty good with the ball at his feet. I felt like he was pretty good going forward, and he's super underrated at set pieces. Like, he's very good in the air.
Yeah.
And I think that like maybe him playing in a system that's a little bit more open, I think suits him better in terms of that. I think he did well at Burnley because I don't think he was able to use his pace, but he has strength and height, and I think he was able to use those things, right? So I think the thing that will kill Tarkowski is the fact that he won't have two bodies stacked in front of him sitting back. That's the thing that's going to kill him. But he has the pace to stick in and recover. It's just a matter of it's just a simple matter of him not having as much protection, which affects any center back, regardless of how good you are. The less protection you have, the more vulnerable you are. What I like about Tarkowski is I think he has the skill set and the pace to be okay on an island if he needs to be.
Yeah, the thing I worry about, especially, I mean, if they lose Gordon, that's a huge loss. And you kind of like refer to him. Before I go back to Gally, let me get your take on Gordon, Bickler, because Gally was mentioning that he could possibly be like a one-season wonder, and it might be smart, especially for a cash-strapped team, to cash in on him. Do you see him as that? Or, I mean, to me, he was the only thing that I think most Everton fans could see as a positive. So selling that, despite obviously the financial gains, like how do you balance that out?
I don't think he's a one-season wonder personally. I think if you sell him in this window, regardless of what you get for him, you basically guarantee your relegation. That's how strongly I feel about it. I feel like I feel from a business standpoint, say he doesn't have the year he has last year, he's so young that the probability that his value will continue to rise over time versus what you sell him in this year is like, it's almost a guarantee that he's going to continue to raise his value off of last year. And I think that selling him no matter what this year would be just a massive mistake. I think at this point, it's critical that you hang on to your young talent, not only from just a performance development standpoint, but from a financial standpoint. I think it's critical that you hang on to your young guys.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if he's a one-season wonder or not. He might be, he might not be. I just know, when I asked the question about Richarlison, one thing I liked/did not like about him was his movement. He made a lot of runs off the ball, creating a lot of space for other players, and that's what kind of like made him dangerous too. It's a guy that you always have to watch. I mean, with Gordon, I think the price would be financially hard to turn down money-wise, but it's just like the psychological punch in the guts is what I'd be worried about, right, Gally? I mean, in terms of what it would mean to the rest of the team.
No question. And I wasn't advocating. I don't think he's a one-season wonder either. I do think he's got some real issues in his game. To lead the Premier League as a teenager in dives is not a good look. having multiple times being booked for simulation in your first professional season is not a good look. It's not something you want to get dinged with. The other thing, the rumblings, and I read an article in the Echo earlier this week, is that he won't negotiate contract terms because his people are so outlandish that he basically should be like the highest paid player at the club. So I think he might not have the best voices. So if Newcastle were to come in and be offering him a wage packet that was much higher, maybe he'd even be pushing and not signing a deal. The other argument is they've been linked to both Maxwell Cornet and Alan St. Maximin, which would both become their best player, I believe, talent-wise, if they signed. So, I think you keep Gordon no matter what if you're smart. But if they pull off, and supposedly they're negotiating personal terms at this point because they're willing to pay the $20 million release clause. If they can get Cornet, that's as big of a coup as it was when Cornet went to Burnley. And if they were to get Alan St. Maximin, for me, I'm not a huge fan. I love watching him play, but I wouldn't want him on my team or at my club.
Exactly.
He doesn't do enough of my stuff. But I could see him being a big success. I don't want him at Everton. So those are things that I could see changing this window. If one of those two players were to sign, I would feel very confident that Everton would finish somewhere between 14 and 16 and probably be out of the relegation zone, which for an Everton fan might be music to their ears right now, because I think if they're going into this campaign, the only thing they can hang their hat on is that Bournemouth and Fulham are in the Premier League, and so is Forest. Because other than that, they would be my odds-on pick of any team who staved off relegation last year to go down this year.
Yeah, I think the thing with Gordon is he probably knows. The outrage that would come from the fans if they did move him or if they lost him. Because I think, apart from Richarlison we were talking about earlier, I think he's a fan favorite over there and he's seen as the future. And he was, seen as the. I would watch a lot of their fan TV and stuff like that after their games because it's good entertainment. And a lot of the talk was, he looked like the only guy trying in certain games. And I know, sometimes it's just appearances, but I know the fans will be big on him. So he knows his value right now is big in terms of social media and the public perception wise, aside from just football business wise.
Let's be real. We give all the credit to Richarlison, right? We talk about it. Richarlison's energy, his efforts, Gordon's pizzazz, Frank's shortcomings. If we're being real and we're being objective as the goal of this podcast or of this show, even when we talk about Everton,
sing it.
Tyrannosaurus Rex arms Jordan Pickford, as much as we hate him, as much as he should have been arrested for assault for what he did on our campaign coming off the title and taking out Van Dijk, he was single-handedly the reason they stayed up. He had 2 or 3 heroic performances, including a 14-save clean sheet that got them 3 of those points. He was huge down the stretch, and he was basically the vocal leader that kept any form of defensive stability that they had. And it pains me to say those nice things about him, but don't worry, the World Cup's coming, and he'll let everyone in England down again, and we'll all be able to make jokes. But he was their best player last year, top to bottom, probably. He is their club's leader, which is kind of disgusting to say out loud. But they're in the championship right now, and he might be at Newcastle as the starting keeper instead of Nick Pope at Newcastle because Burnley went down, in my opinion, if he wasn't in between the sticks. And it pains me to say it, but we did a whole thing on them, and we didn't talk about maybe the player who has been the most influential there since he got there. But he's just so damn annoying, and it's so nice to watch him make a fool out of himself. But really, it was his antics that helped them stay up. He gives them an identity, as terrible as that is.
Yeah, you're going to need a shower after that serenade for Pickford over there.
You're the one who asked me to be objective.
So where do they end up, Bickler? Can Everton fans?
I'm with you guys right now. For me, it's 16 to 18, right? I think if they get a couple of signings in, they can move up some spots. Cornet would be huge for them. But yeah, for right now, they got to be pushing that relegation battle as it stands now. I don't know how. I think the main point is they're in a really, really tough financial spot with the wrong manager. So
how does that ever work out well?
Yeah, exactly.
What do you have for him, Gally?
I said it
that
before.
serenade, I think the bad news is coming.
It's 15-18, and honestly, they could easily finish 19th because I think the team we're going to talk about next, Fulham, has a better roster actually top to bottom. I just have to question whether or not they can do it in the Prem League, and we'll get there. But I think it's 15-18. Give me a Maxwell Cornet or another signing defensively. Maybe they're 13-15, but they're no better than bottom of the table, just barely out of the relegation zone, in my opinion.
Yeah, I will have to agree. I mean, it's, you look around at the other teams, it's hard to pick, more than like 2-3 teams that you feel like will be weaker than Everton. Even if they do get those signings, I just do not have a lot of faith in Frankie over there. And that's probably why I'm guessing it might not be as brutal as last year and as stressful for Everton fans for relegation battle. Might be, like semi-distance, because I feel like there'll be a couple of teams that are, calling it early Norwich style this season, but still, I think they are going to be for a tough season. So I agree, probably like 16-18, 15-18 is where I have them as well. So not good news for the Everton fans, but I would love to hear from them. I just don't see them being as optimistic because not a lot has changed to bring that optimism. But let us know what you think in the comments and be kind, damn it. Okay. Next up, we got Fulham. So, Bickler, I can't remember whose turn it was, but let's start with you on this one. I know we watched, as Liverpool fans, I think I can speak on behalf of all of us. We watched a lot of Fulham last year, just basically able to see Carvalho and stuff like that, especially like we got him signed. What do you make of, obviously they lost him. Maybe we should start with like the losses first, I guess. What do you make of like what they lost? I mean, losing Surrey to Hull City is not that big of a deal, obviously. And then Sessegnon. What do you make of it? Losing Carvalho, how much will it impact this team?
I mean, I think it impacts them pretty significantly. I mean, they're built for this, though. They seem to kind of just reload. So I think that they'll eventually, I think they'll settle out and be fine. I think this is going to be very similar to like what we saw with Leeds and what we saw with Brentford, where they come in, take some teams by surprise. About mid-season, everybody sort of adjusts, figures them out, and then they drop some points and they finish sort of in that mid-table kind of flux range. But I mean, they've got a lot of young, good talent. I mean, we'll talk about the transfers in a minute. I think they've got the right sort of system. I love the way they play football. I think they're one of those newcomers coming in. It's going to be really exciting to see. I mean, very similar to like when we saw Brentford, and they're just a lot of fun to watch. You can always appreciate the football.
Yeah, because as great of a player as Carvalho is, and we're seeing more and more of him in a Liverpool jersey now and kind of like loving it, it is a lot more about the system, right, Gally, as opposed to like individual players in some ways for Fulham?
Yeah, I think that Marco Silva's done a really nice job with this group of players. Anyone who watched the first episode knows I'm not the largest Scott Parker fan, and maybe didn't rate him so highly as a Fulham manager. And him taking them down and walking to another club, I think was the greatest thing that happened to Fulham. And it allowed them to hire a manager that was progressive with the type of football they wanted to play. And I think he absolutely got the best out of Mitrovic they've ever had. He took at a time where Carvalho was ready to take that next step. I feel like he helped prod him and push him. And I think we're very lucky that he had a manager like Marco Silva for a year that let him experiment and make some mistakes in the championship. Some are probably covered up by being at a championship level. And, old friend Harry Wilson went there and had a really, really good campaign and became a key contributor. For me, it's going to come down to, can Mitrovic score enough goals at the EPL level, which the jury has to still be out after, I think he's had 3 seasons in the Prem, and every time he scores 50 to 60% less goals than the year before when he was in the championship. And, does Harry Wilson have the speed and the tactical nous to actually take on Premier League ready fullbacks and create? And lastly, we're going to talk about the incomings. I think the Andreas Pereira signing from United they are expecting a lot out of this player. They signed him to be the Carvalho replacement and play in the hole behind Mitrovic. They don't plan to change their style. So he has to be big. Now, he's already on set pieces. He's already showing that he's playing a big part so far in their few preseason friendlies. But this is a guy who could never sniff a chance at United, even though for four or five managers, not one has rated him since Sir Alex left. So that has to be said for something. And he's never been invited back for a second loan campaign at the same club either, which sometimes speaks about the player, right? So objectivity here, I can't rank on a freaking ex-United player just because he's ex-United. So I guess I'm just questioning it because he's Brazilian. Send the hate, Brazil.
And that's what I was gonna get to. I mean, United has been a mess in terms of like the manager carousel, and they keep adding more players instead of trying to see what they can get out of their current players sometimes. But I think that was the point. I'm glad you mentioned it, that he's never done the same gig again. And you would think in many cases where that happens, you get a bid for the player, or you're like, even if they can afford him, they want him back because they like what they saw and stuff. Is that a concern for you?
I do think that there's a little concern to that, and I think he deserves the benefit of the doubt to at least be given an opportunity to play in a first team setup, and they really wanted him there. So I'm hoping or thinking that there was some logic behind it. I just think that what you see on this screen represents there still has to be some more business to be done. But I will give them credit. Last time they came up, they spent $100 million and basically turned over the entire team that they brought up to the Prem, and then went straight back down and lost all those players, and it hurt them. And then they went back to their core group and they got called up. And it looks like they're taking the approach to strengthen that side, but go with the, dance with the one that brought you there. So I give them credit, and I hope that works out for them. I'm not sure it will.
Yeah, because we were talking about this when we were doing like the Bournemouth preview in terms of, the different approaches teams take when they come back from the championship. Do they just kind of like go with what they had, tweak it a little bit, or do they just say, we're back, and then just kind of like blow it up? Because sometimes it did make like almost like they made too many changes. I do like Marco Silva as well. I feel like he's one of the good dudes in some ways. I mean, we're Liverpool fans. Even when he was coaching Everton, I found it hard to kind of dislike him, if you will. But it's going to be interesting to see how some of these players that performed really well in the championship do now in the Premier League. Mitrovic is probably the most important key to that. I mean, is it just a matter of his level, you think, Gally, that has never translated into the same success in the Premiership, or is just like the style that keeps almost like changing?
It's hard for me, man, because I was bullish on the guy when he was all the way back to Newcastle, because you'd see his sheer size and his power, and you think to yourself, like, this guy has to be able to handle it. I mean, I always use the analogies whenever I talk about some of these players from Serbia. Like, we act like they can't handle the pressure of being the Newcastle striker, and they grew up in neighborhoods where bombs were going off in the background as teenagers. Like, I remember one time, like, hearing that about that basketball player that was the huge flop, and everyone, we'll do this before Bickler gets back and talk about the Detroit Pistons not taking Carmelo Anthony. But there was that player that that they had, and one time he got asked,
we said Detroit Pistons.
He's back. Damn it, he heard that.
He's back, and he got audio. All I had to do was talk about the Detroit Pistons not taking Carmelo Anthony.
Hey, this will be the first year I watch them in like 15. They're gonna be good.
But I always joke that when they asked the player, and I don't know why my brain is in mush right now, I can't pull it out, but they asked him like how he feels about being an NBA flop, and he was like, do you think I care about being an NBA flop? I grew up literally in a war zone. My middle school was once bombed while I was taking class. And like, it's a real mentality. And I kind of equate that to Mitrovic sometimes. Like, it looks like nothing bothers him. At the same time, we've seen these players come up and go down and have huge success. And I think we talked about it with Solanke last week with Bournemouth. and Fulham is no different. Mitrovic has to prove that he's a Premier League center forward. And I think that if the 4 to 5 years worth of experience and history we've seen has probably told us he is not. The fact that they're not out in the market trying to bring in a ready-made striker or an alternative, to me, is a little surprising because their offensive attacking players look a little weak to me, to be honest.
And that's the thing. I mean, there has been times where he would have like a good run in the Premier League, and you would be like, oh, he's coming to his own, and then he would go quiet. And obviously, you know, like strikers are going to be like that at times, but it feels like his fluctuates a lot more than others. And I think he's so pivotal to how that team performs that, you know, when he is not performing, it's going to make it tough on them to get goals, especially in the Premier League, because you're going to be facing obviously a lot better defenses. I think some of those, you know, the weaknesses like we were talking about earlier, like you were saying, Gally, you can sometimes get away with in the Championship, but Premier League is much more ruthless when it comes to that. So Bickler, Pistons, no, I'm saying Fulham. Where do you think they're gonna end up? How they perform this year on their year back?
I think they'll be in that I want to say 12 to 16 range, like back half of the middle table. I really like the Polina edition. I think he's a stud. I think he's going to be really good. They added one of my least favorite players in the Premier League of all time, in Anders Pereira. This is maybe it shocks some people. This guy is like top 5 in my I absolutely hate the way he plays. He's a diving cheat. I think he whines the entire game. But another player very similar to Charleston, where he's very good at getting under your skin and does some things very effectively. I hate that they got him because other than that, I think they're a pretty likable team, but probably some steel that they needed in the midfield as well. So yeah, I guess I like their additions. They're getting some Swiss kid as a right back. So they're continuing to add some additions. Yeah, I think that back half of that table, I really think probably 12 to 15 range is where I see them settling out this year.
How about you, Gally?
I've actually got them 16 to 19, and it's primarily because they haven't changed the center backs that couldn't stop anyone from scoring a record level of goals. And I know they have a better manager now, but I do think they're in the Premier League. And, you know, as we joked about ourselves last week, right, we're going to basically say that 18 teams are going to finish between 9 and 12. Somebody's got to get relegated outside of Bournemouth. I apologize again, Bournemouth fans, in advance. But somebody has to come out. You said someone will be Norwich. And I think if anyone on paper is Norwich this year, it is Bournemouth, finishing 20th to start. And there's got to be 2 other teams that go down. And I think that Fulham's going to have to show me they can stop other teams from scoring and score at the pace they did last year for me to believe that. And I think playing against Premier League teams 36 times, 38 times is going to be a lot harder than what they went through in the Championship with 46. So it's 16 to 19 for me. I hope I'm wrong because I like Fulham as a club, as a side. I like watching the stadium with the stupid cottage. I like all of it. I really do. But I genuinely think they could struggle, and I wouldn't be shocked at all if they find their way back in the Championship, bagging 100 goals and Mitrovic setting new records next year.
Yeah, I'm just going to say ditto because, I mean, exactly how I feel. Like I enjoyed watching them last year. It is a fun team to watch. I like the club. I just don't think between that defense that you mentioned, not being able to stop many attacking teams in the Championship, keeping clean sheets, and now it's going to be in the Premier League, playing against some tough teams. And I really think they're going to have much tough time scoring. I think in the Championship, they could outscore people. I don't think that's going to happen in the Premier League. So unfortunately, I do have them for these reasons. You've been chopped, as they say in the show. I think he's going to be Fulham is going to be going back down to the Championship unless they make some moves that really pays off. I mean, nothing that's I see now that they're working on that I can say if this happens, they might climb out of there unless they find a gem somewhere and make the most out of it, I do agree that they will be going down 16 to under for me. Next up, we have Leeds. Interesting scenario over here. Gally, I want to start with you on this one. Obviously, they lose, possibly their best two players in Rafinha and Calvin Phillips. A lot of new additions coming in. Do they offset, you think, what they lost? Have they done enough business to cover what was lost?
Well, I think when you lose your two best players, you can't really say, right? We talked about we're Liverpool supporters, right? When we lost Luis Suarez, we went out and bought 8 players. They look good on paper. And then you realize quickly not one of them was going to fill the boots of the best player in the Premier League that you just lost. They didn't lose the best player in the Premier League by any means, but they lost arguably the most important player the club's had in 20 years in Calvin Phillips, a kid to come through the youth ranks, make it to the top, and starting for the for the England national team. And the base of their spine, right? And then they also lost technically the most talented player they had in Rafinha, and maybe their only game changer. As good as Bamford was the year before, for me, it was really about how good Rafinha was on the wing, creating opportunities, and Bamford doing what good strikers should do, which is, be in the 6-yard box, banging goals, and drink wine out of a box under a bridge. But what I really like about the moves they've made here is I actually like the fact that they gave Jesse Marsch, whether or not you believe Jesse Marsch is a good manager, coach, or the right pick for them, they gave him players that he wanted and he was familiar with. He's had success with Tyler Adams, with Aronson, and with Christensen in the past, especially with Christensen during his time at Salzburg. I love the Sinistera pickup. I think he's actually a fantastic buy and going to be a huge talent. Unfortunate for him, he got hurt yesterday in one of their preseason friendlies, and it looks like he might actually miss the start of the season. So that could be a real blow for them. So, they did a lot of business. Have they made enough defensive signings? No, not for me. But, they conceded, I believe it was like 2 less chances and half a less goal after Marsch took over last year. So there were some defensive improvements. Not that that's much to say when you're coming off a Bielsa team that basically didn't defend. So I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. The one thing I will say, the players say all the right things at Leeds, and that's the existing players and the new players. So something Jesse Marsch is doing is galvanizing that team and seems to be working with them. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that I think they're improving. I don't know if it's good enough yet to put them in a position to not be in a fight come April and May. But I think they're better equipped going into this campaign from a depth standpoint than they were last campaign.
And that's the thing. So now it really hinges a lot on Marsch, I think, because he has brought players that are like he is familiar with. So you look at the sheet and you're like, who picked these players. So there's no doubt that it was players that the manager wanted. Sometimes this works, Bickler, where the manager brings in players to a new team that he's familiar with, maybe players who understand what he wants to do. But sometimes it backfires, especially because now this is a different league and it's a much tougher league. So it might not translate as much. If you're a gambling man, and we know you are, I'm going to keep saying this. Which way do you gamble?
Which way do I go in terms of what? Like, where do they land on the table?
In terms of like, do these moves translate in terms of how he wants to play? Do they bring that over with them, or when the Premier League, it's a different ball game and it does not translate?
I think it probably does. Like, we've established the fact that he at least has an identifiable system he wants to play, and it improved them immediately. And he's bringing players from that system, and I don't think that ever hurts. That is the opposite of Jurgen Klopp does, right? He has an identifiable system. He shuts the door and says, I'm never going to see these players again. So, there's 2 schools of thought on that, where you want to develop your own, identify your own, and get new players for your system. And maybe Leeds doesn't have the setup from a scouting standpoint or from a personnel standpoint to pull that off and identify players. So the easiest and most digestible thing to do is to go to what you know. I'm really conflicted on Leeds because I don't like the parts. I don't like the pieces that are there for Jesse Marsch. but everything's trending up for them. If you look at the back of last year, I think obviously Rafinha, Phillips are big blows. I look at that transfer list, and I hate to say this. I look at that transfer list of players they brought in. I actually love that list if you take the Americans out of it. If you take the Americans, I'm being honest. Like,
but this is getting ridiculous.
It's $50 million. It's half of what they spent between Tyler Adams and Aronson. You take those out of them. I like those players that are left there. I think Roca is a stud out of Bayern. I think he's going to be a really, really nice player as defensive mid. But I think a lot of this is going to hinge on, like, I don't know, like, so can they hang on to Jack Harrison? There's like vultures circling over that. I'm not sure Jack wants to be there much longer. Like, so can they hang on to Harrison, who I think is a key piece for them? So there are some questions, and we've seen this with like teams that have big windows, from the big guys with Chelsea all the way to the little guys. Like, can you get this many new pieces to gel? That helps that they're all coming from similar systems. That certainly helps. I just don't know. I don't know what this is going to end up looking like for them. It's projecting the right way. But I do think, like, getting these fullbacks in is good, because you now have the ability to get Luke Ayling into the center back position where he needs to be. He doesn't need to be out right on the right back side. So he's doing things that are smart, but the pieces, I don't know. They're not. We've seen this team have a lot of injury issues. So, like, that's going to be a big part of this. Can these guys stay healthy as the core all the way through? I don't know, man. For me, like, I look at this team. If they're able to get this Belgian striker, that would be a major coup for them. This young Belgian kid they're trying to get, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his name, but AC Milan's number one target. They're in for him big. I knew Leeds is big in for them. If Leeds is able to pull that off, that would be a major coup for them. In a good sign for them if they can pull somebody like that in. I still see them personally as like 15 to 18 in this. I see them at 15 through 18, and I feel like I should be more bullish on them. I'm not, though. For whatever reason, I don't know. I'm probably lower than I should be on them, but I see that 15 to 18 for them.
I think you look at this list, Gally. I mean, one thing I like about that list is the youth, right? I mean, there's a lot of like young players that they're kind of like building for the future. You kind of knew Bickler was going to be negative about the American players, and I'm amazed he didn't say Bamford 10 times. What do you make? You're like the American national team contingent over here. What do you make of these signings? Well, I mean,
all it really means is I watch him and complain. Paul just complains. I
guess that's fair.
I'm not doing the work. I'm not going to do the work when Gally's doing it for me.
I don't blame you. You know you're going to get the rant no matter what. So
I was the kid on a group project that would just get in right at the end.
Yeah, I do find it funny. We had to have a whole discussion about all the hate that gets directed at us as Americans. And then we talk about Americans and we throw more hate on them than anyone overseas does. As far as
just blame Bickler.
I'll say this. I'm not a Tyler Adams fan, was not a Tyler Adams fan in the national team. Everyone talks about all the intangibles and what he does, how he could be the best American player. I would take Weston McKennie every day of the week and twice on Sunday if I needed a player to give me 10 minutes of hard work in a midfield from anyone from the United States. So I'm not a fan of Adams. So I don't know that signing will be great, but I'm not sure he's going to be the actual starter, because I think they're going to play Roca in the Phillips role as a defensive midfielder. And I think Adams might be more cover, and Adams probably doesn't want to hear this. He's probably going to play some right and left back, which he always bitches about. I completely disagree on Aronson. Aronson was on Juventus's radar. Aronson was on Dortmund's radar. Aronson had bids for him from other bigger Premier League clubs, and they tried to buy him before they hired Jesse Marsch. Aronson's been a big player on the docket, I believe, for a lot of different clubs, because he does something that we haven't seen from most Americans. He bet it right in and showed that he could play in 2-3 different positions in a lot of different fluent setups. And I think he's going to play behind Bamford and actually be a starter in that side. And Jesse Marsch kind of alluded to that Rodrigo had a fight to be the second attacking player on this team. And I think that's because they paid a lot of money. Now there's going to be a lot of pressure on him. But I think this kid comes and might be the most complete attacking player to come out of MLS in a long time. Like, there are a lot of people believe he was more ready to play in Europe than Almiron was, just because of the way he plays. And he can do things that Leeds doesn't have. And that's that number 10 kind of floating player. I think Aronson, if he hits the ground running, has a real good chance to be a big, important piece. And I think the left wing has a chance to basically take the Rafinha mantle and be their best player. And I think that's important. Bamford cannot be their best player, or they are going to be in that 15 to 18, battle and relegation all year long, in my opinion, because I don't think you can consistently expect Bamford to give you 30 starts and 15 to 20 goal involvements, because he's only proven to do that once. And to steal a line from the Johnny Dangerously movie, my grandmother hung me on a hook once. And it's a once is what you have to remember out of that, And I just feel like that's Bamford. Like, I was a Premier League striker once, but he had 4 other shots where he wasn't.
Bamford will always be the best player.
I know.
How dare you?
I know, right? I know. This is for those of you who are not familiar with our regular podcast. Bickler is the president and one of the few members of the Bamford Club, I think. So, where do you were putting them at 15 to 18 then, Gally?
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough for them. I think they're going to have to fight all year, and I think we'll find a lot about the players. And I think, honestly, you'll find out a lot about Jesse Marsch as a manager, because I think he came in last year. He got a lot of flack. It didn't go good. He got picked on for being Ted Lasso and all these different things. But I feel like he earned the respect of the players and the Leeds supporters. And I think they're actually behind him. And I think anyone who, would admit in public that they're a Leeds supporter would actually say to you, it isn't often that our supporters are 100% behind the manager, especially if he's not one of our own. And that was what was such a surprise about Bielsa. And I think the fact that they moved to a guy that wasn't a guarantee showed that they had a real plan for this guy. And I think they do believe in him. And I hope it works out for him, because as we always say, the more people in this country that follow European football, the better football will be in this country. And there is a way for that to happen, and that's to have a successful manager, and a couple successful players performing at good clubs. So for me, it's a good sign for the sport growing over here positively, and us not being thrown in our face every 15 minutes of how great these Americans are, like we've had with Pulisic, or even when Bob Bradley went to Swansea and everyone knew he would fail. I think Jesse Marsch did it the right way and took the steps you're supposed to take to get a job. And now I hope he succeeds for doing that. I don't care that he does or not, because he's American. I care he does or not, so it helps what we're trying to do over here, which is create more support for the international game here in the States.
Bickler, you already mentioned it, but just to confirm, you're putting them in that 15 to 18 spot as well?
Yep.
I think, I agree. I think it's going to be a battle. Really, this is one of the teams that the beginning of the season is going to be key, because they had that burst when he came over. Is it going to carry over to the beginning of the season, or was it just like a honeymoon period that just lined up perfectly? We'll see. Obviously, they invested a lot in youth. We'll see if it pays off. But I do have them struggling. But I think they will still make it and stay up. So you can send the Bamford Love email straight to Bickler, because he's collecting those. And then the Leeds hate email, I guess, can come to me and Gally over here. Well, that's what we have for Leeds, everyone.